Ms. Anita Sharon, Assistant Professor from the Department of Management Studies, MAHRM, and I am going to teach you about research process today. Research process. It's a research process. The research process involves identifying, locating, assessing, and analyzing the information that you need to support your research question and then develop and express your ideas. Step 1. Formulating the research problem. So there are two types of research problem that exist. That is one, those which relate to the states of nature. Another one is the relationship between the variables. So the researcher is in a position where he has to identify what kind of problem he wants to study, and also through the problem identification he would be able to develop a feasible solution for the particular problem that he has identified. Two major steps involved in formulating the research problem. Number one is understanding the problem thoroughly, and number two is rephrasing the same into meaningful terms from an analytical point of view for the researcher. Step 2. Extensive literature survey. So the most important part of a research is an extensive literature survey which has to be done by the researcher. So what is a literature survey? A literature survey is nothing but examining the available literature that are pertaining to the areas of research of the particular researcher, and also this would help the researcher to gain an acquainted knowledge to the selected problem. So there are two types of researchers that we have. One is the conceptual literature, another one is the empirical literature. So conceptual literature is about the concepts and theories, and empirical literature is about the studies which are made earlier, which are similar to the proposed one. Step 3. Developing a working hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a very important part of a research which is going to give you a solution for your problem which you have identified. A hypothesis is nothing but a tentative assumption which is made in order to draw out and test its logical or empirical consequences. So hypothesis for a study helps the researcher to get a focal point for the research, and also hypothesis should be very specific and limited to the piece of research in hand. So the major role of hypothesis is to guide the researcher by delimiting the area of research and also help him to keep on the right track. Step 4. Preparing the research design. So the research design is a conceptual structure within which a research would be conducted. So the preparation of a design facilitates the researcher to be as efficient as possible, and also it would help him to get maximum information from the available resource that he is collecting for the research. So under the research design there are four categories, or otherwise you can call them as the four types of research. So the first one is the explorative research design. The second one is the descriptive research design. The third one is the diagnosis research design, and the fourth one is the experimental research design. So the preparation of research design has to be very appropriate based on the research problem, and the following points have to be kept in mind before choosing the research design. The first is the means of obtaining the information. The second is the availability and the skills of the researcher. The third is the explanation of the way in which the selected means of obtaining information can be organized, and the organized information has to be able to reason leading to the selection of the problem, and the time which is available for the researcher, and the cost factors that are relating to the research. 5. Determining the sample design. See, all the items in the research in any field of inquiry definitely constitutes a particular population, and a complete enumeration of these items, or otherwise known as the population, can be called as a census inquiry, or otherwise it can be called as a sample study. So the researcher must decide the way of selecting a sample, or what is popularly known as a sample design. So let us see what a sample design is. So a sample design is a definite plan determined before any data are, which is actually collected for obtaining a sample from a population. Samples can be of two types. One is called as the probability sampling, another one is called as the non-probability sampling. So probability sampling is each element has a known probability of being included in the sample. A probability method is any method of sampling that utilizes some form of a random selection. Non-probability sampling does not allow the researcher to determine the probability. So non-probability sampling can be defined as a sampling technique in which the researcher selects samples based on the subjective judgment of the research rather than the random selection. Step 6. Collecting the data. So there are two types of data collection which is done in a research. One is called as the primary data collection, another one is called as the secondary data collection. So primary data can be collected through experiment or through surveys, and secondary data are those which can be collected from the already available sources such as books, magazines, journals, articles, etc. Step 7 is the execution of the project. So execution of the project must be done at the correct time, and this is a very important phase. Researchers should see that the project is executed in a very systematic manner and in time. Step 8. Analysis of data. So after the data has been collected, the researcher turns to the task of analyzing them. So here is the challenge for the researcher, where he has to categorize the raw data which he has collected, and he will be categorizing them into three heads. That is, one is coding, another one is tabulation, and statistical inferences. He would be categorizing them and also processing them under these three heads. Step 9 is hypothesis testing. So after analyzing the data, the researcher is in a position to test the hypothesis. So the researcher has to find out an answer for this question. Do the facts support the hypothesis, or they happen to be contrary? So various tests such as chi-square, t-test, f-test have been developed by statisticians for this purpose. So hypothesis testing will result in either accepting or rejecting the hypothesis. Step 10. Generalization and interpretation. So if the hypothesis is tested and upheld several times, it may be possible for the researcher to arrive at a generalized solution. A generalized solution is nothing but the researcher would be able to build a theory. So if the researcher has no hypothesis to start with, he might seek to explain his findings on the basis of some theory, a theory which has already been developed by another researcher, and this is known as an interpretation. Step 11. Preparation of the report or hypothesis. Finally, the researcher has to prepare the report of what he has done throughout the research process. So the layout of the research report should be as follows. It must contain three sections. One is the preliminary pages, which consist of the title, the acknowledgement, and the foreword. The second is the main text, which comprises of the introduction, the main report, the findings, and the conclusion. And the last part is the end matter, which comprises of the appendices and the bibliography. Students, I hope this session was valuable, informative, and also gave you a knowledgeable insight about the research process. Thank you.